This is Chris Callett with musegrid.com, and this is a special extended edition of a tutorial. We've been having a lot of requests to help you guys to show you how to use images effectively in your designs, and that comes with either just putting images onto pages, including them in text, or looking at the entire usage of images within Adobe Muse. So let's kickstart this tutorial and take a look at some basics to start off with. So here we've got just a blank page. What we've done is we've switched the master to have nothing in it and put all of our header and footer to 0. So we've just got this nice blank page. Nothing special, just giving us a blank page. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to pull some images in. So we can do that in a couple of different ways. First of all, we can just drag an image from our desktop or from a folder and place it on the page. That's one way we could do it. We could do File, Place, and we could choose that same image and bring it in on the page as well. So that's two ways of doing it. Now, Muse supports PSD files, or at least the import of PSD files, so Photoshop files. And it also works cleverly with the layers in a Photoshop file. So I've prepared this Photoshop file here, and you can see that it's got 3 layers. You can see the 3 layers there, and so these 3 layers that we have here. So once we bring this into Muse, you'll see what happens. First of all, if I drag it from the desktop into my site, what it does is it brings in just the top visible layer. Okay, so kind of like a composite of the entire Photoshop file. So let's just remove that again. Let's change one of these layers so that we've got a bit of the orange there showing, and let's save that again. File, save. So now if we bring that in again, you see it's bringing in the composite of all the layers there. Well, that's when we drag and drop it in place. Okay, now I'm just going to reset this and press save. Now if we use the place command, so that's under File and then Place, watch what happens now. We choose the same PSD file, click Open, and we now get this new dialog. So do we want to import the composite image, which is what happened when we dragged it off the desktop into the file, or do we want to import one of the layers? And this is a really useful feature because you can build your website designs in Photoshop and then bring them in layer by layer into Muse, which is very, very useful. And what it does as well, and I'll show you in a minute, it keeps the connection with the PSD file so you can modify it. So what we're going to do, we're going to click on Import Layer, and you'll see all our layers are now available to us. And it's also important to use the clip to layer contents. So let's say, for instance, you had a big Photoshop file and the part of the image that you wanted to bring in as a layer was just say 100 pixels by 100 pixels. Now if you didn't click the clip to layer content, what would happen is it would bring in that one layer, but it would bring it in with all of the surrounding space around it. So if it was an image that was 600 by 500, the actual image size would be 600 by 500, but the graphic would still only be 100 pixels by 100 pixels. If you use the clip to layer and the image is 100 pixels by 100 pixels, that particular layer, it will keep it to that size. Okay, so we're going to click on the clip to layers here, and we can see that's that layer. Let's bring in another layer with the place command. So I'm going to choose that file again, and I'm going to choose layer 2, and then lastly let's pull in that last layer, layer 3. Oh, I should have clicked company. There we go. Okay, so we've got our 3 layers in here, and we've also got that layer that we dragged in here initially. Now, if I right click on any of these layers, I can do Edit Original. Now, seeing as this is a PSD file, when I click on Edit Original, it'll take me back to Photoshop. So now if I put in some text, I'm just going to type on here edited. Okay, let me just square that up, and then I'm going to merge it with that layer, because remember we're bringing in one layer at a time here, so I'm going to merge those two layers. And now press save. We go back to Muse and it updates, and there you can see the text that I just put in there. And all of the other layers are independent, they haven't been modified, so that just this one layer has been modified. So that's really useful as well. If you use PSDs rather than bringing in pre-sliced up images like GIFs, JPEGs, if you bring the PSDs into Muse, then you can still edit them. So if you wanted to make some changes, you could just go back to the Photoshop file, save it, and it would automatically update your Muse page. That's really useful if you're in the process of building a site for a client, because it means you don't have to re-export those images out. So that's really useful. Now let's just publish this. Let's do some modifications and then publish this to see what it does with all of those layers, because remember they started off as PSD files, so what do they become when we upload the site? But before we do that, I'm just going to show you some resizing features that we've got. So if we want to resize an image, by default, if you grab the corner, you can resize it, okay? And it will resize proportionally. This is really useful because very often in a lot of other products, when you're resizing, you have to press the Shift key to lock the proportionality of it. However, in Muse, the Shift key actually unlocks the resize by proportion. So for instance, if I press Shift while I'm using this image, you see I can rescale it to whatever dimensions I want. Whereas if I take my finger off Shift, I can resize it down and it's all proportional. Okay, so we've got our 3 layers there. Now if I click on, I'm going to export this site as HTML. I'm going to support it to this test folder that I've preset up. So there's our page. Now let's open that test folder and see what Muse has done with those images. We've got our HTML pages and so on, but in the image file, can you see we've got transparent, we've got, sorry, not transparent, these are all JPEGs. Now, what's going to happen if I put some transparency on this? So I've got this fill color here. I'm going to drop the opacity of this image layer down in Muse, and I'm going to do export as HTML, go through the same process again. So we've got that transparent layer now. Let's see what happens in the images now. There's still JPEGs, which is absolutely fine. That's exactly what we wanted them to be, but we're just using CSS to drop the transparency down. Now let's see what happens. I've got that transparency. Let's put the transparency back up, but I actually want this image to have round corners. So I'm going to switch on the rounded corners, and I'm going to also switch on a border. Now let's file, export as HTML. So we've got that now, that image with borders. Let's open it up in our images, and now you'll see that that image is now a PNG file. So what Muse has done is it's realized that we actually are modifying the image within Muse, and it's done a little bit of image editing, but it's also exported it out as a transparent PNG. So it's very clever the way that Muse handles images, so that you can apply these different effects in real time, and it will export the appropriate image. So that means we've still, when we put this, let's bring this to the front, when we put this image over other images, we've still got the round corners because it's now a transparent PNG, even though it started off as a Photoshop file and was exported out as a JPEG. Now we've done some modifications to it. Muse knows that and turns it into a PNG file. So let's just apply some effects to it as well. Let's put a drop shadow on it, and let's just put a bevel on it as well. Okay, now if we export that out again, File, Export as HTML, we've got our shadow there. And if we take a look at images, you can see that the drop shadow has been applied to the actual PNG as transparency. However, if we did the same thing with what's going to be a JPEG file, let's see what happens then. So I'm going to put some drop shadow on it. Let's do File, Export as HTML. Open up our test file. And you can see now that that one is a transparent PNG as well. So it's really useful to know how this all works so that you understand what you can actually do to this. Now, interestingly now, if we switch the effects off, so we're going to switch everything off that we've applied, and then we'll do File, Export again. Okay, and let's take a look at our files. So now those layers are back to being JPEGs again, because Muse decides that, well, they're better off being JPEGs for their file size, so it exports them as JPEG because no transparency is needed. So that's bringing in images into the pages. What else can we do with them? Okay, so we've got this large image here. Now if we double click on it, we'll see that the bounding box turns to an orangey color here, and we can actually move the image around within its frame. So by double clicking on the image, what we've actually done is converted the image bounding box into I think it's either a div or a span, but certainly a HTML element where the image then becomes the image area, dimensions, the bounding box, then becomes a clipping path for the image inside it. And I'll show you exactly what that means, the kind of things you can do. So this image here, I'm going to just move it in its bounding box here, and then if I click on the fill here, you can see I've now got a fill in that image. So I started off with just a normal image that I dragged onto the page, but when we, if we now preview this page in the browser, I'll show you what happens with the HTML. Not that Muse is about HTML, this is just an example. You can now see that there's a div now wrapped around this image, and it's got that pink color, and the image is sitting inside it, and we've got its position set here. If we just click on, can you see what's happened there? So this, whereas this was initially just an image, the image is now within a div, and that's just by double clicking. So if I reset that, I'm just gonna undo, we go back. Now at the moment now, if we do File, Preview Page in Browser, and Inspect Element, we can see that that's just a straightforward image there. It's still set within a div, but it's just an image on the page. So we've looked at so far, we've looked at how to bring images onto the page, bringing in PSD files as layers, how to resize. We can also rotate images, and if we preview that in the browser, let's do File, Preview in Browser, we can see that if we click on this now and open up that image, the image is actually rotated with CSS as opposed to just rotating the image and then pushing out. So it keeps the edges a lot cleaner. So we can see here, let's have a look. Here we go. We've got the rotation here on using all of the different code for IE and so on. So we're using CSS to rotate the image itself, rather than what used to happen would be that this image was rotated, but then you'd get these terrible jaggy pixelated edges. So let's just reset that. So yes, we've looked at how to include images on a page, editing the image in its original source. Now if you bring a PNG file in, it will open when you click on edit original, it'll try and edit the PNG or the JPEG in whatever you've got as an image editor as default on your machine. So with a Mac, it very often opens it up in preview, whereas because it's a PSD file, then PSD files are supported, so it'll just go back to Photoshop to edit it in Photoshop. So what are we going to look at next? Well, let's remove these images for the time being. So we've used those. Let's see what else we can do with images. Now first off, I'm going to create a rectangle. We're going to leave this black border on it so we can see it. And what I'm going to do then is I'm going to go to the fill options, and this is another way of bringing images onto a page. And this works very effectively if you want to create image placeholders because you don't have the imagery yet. You can still do this, or whenever you want to use a background image. So we can set the fill color, of course, on a rectangle or on the page or on this text block, on lots of other elements. We can change the background color. We can have it as a gradient also, but we can also set an image. So I'm going to go back to my desktop and I'm going to pull in that sample image again. Now at the moment it's bringing it in as the original size, so we can see it's been clipped. So if I set it to centered, and then I've got these options here, I can do scale to fill. So what that'll do now is it will fill the image, but it may also warp the image because it's stretching its dimensions to fill the area. We can do scale to fit. Now what that does is it brings the image in, but it brings it in proportionally. So if the rectangle is bigger in any direction than the image itself, there'll be white space shown, which if I change the color, you could see would then be filled up with the color. We've also got original size, which we used for the first one. We've got tile. Now that will work only if the area is bigger than the image. You won't see it. So you can see there, we've got the tiled image there. So that's full tiling, that's horizontal and vertical. Or we can just use horizontal tiling or just vertical tiling. And we can also set where that image tiling starts. And we can also do that on the scale to fit and scale to fill. So if we do the scale to fit, we can set that it starts in the corner. So that's useful when you're building your pages if you want to use image backgrounds. Let's just resize this a minute. We got this set to scale to fill. I'm going to remove that fill by hitting the little garbage, and then we're back to 0. But you can actually combine fills, background fills, with images. So I'm going to show you this now. Let's imagine that this is a header area. I'm going to choose this color. I'm going to choose a nice bright yellow, quite a hideous color for our website, but let's just use it for illustration purposes. And then I'm going to click on my fill, and now I'm going to choose a transparent fill, PNG. So we've brought that in. Let's have a look. That's the correct one, isn't it? Yes. So we've brought that fill in there. Let's. I think that's correct. There we go. And you can see that what this fill color is doing is bringing in a transparent PNG, so we create a texture on the top of the color. Now currently that fill is set to scale to fit, so once the image has met its bounds, then it stops growing any larger. But what we want to actually do is tile that. So we're going to do, rather than scale to fit or original size, we're going to choose tile. And now that image is tiled across. Again, you can set where the starting point for that image is, which is useful if you're using a background that you want to be centered. But notice what happens now. If I go to File, Preview Page in Browser, this background now scales with the page because we're using the full width rectangle. But we've got this nice texture, so you can get those really nice textured backgrounds that you've seen on other websites just using a background color and a fill. Now with fill you don't have gradient as well, so you can only use a background color and the image, or you can use a gradient. You can't use both. But if you did want to use a gradient, if we just replicate this item here, I'm going to go to fill and set it to transparent so we can see our texture there. And then on the fill in here, I'm going to switch that off, switch to gradient, and then I'm going to choose, let's go from a red to an orange, nice fire colors, and then I can bring that over the top. And then if I preview this in the browser, we've still got the same effect. If I can grab my browser here, we've still got the same effect, but we've done it in 2 layers instead. So that's how you can get round if you want a gradient with a textured cover over the top. So what's the last thing that we're going to take a look at now? Let me just get rid of this browser fill here. That's why it wasn't showing up earlier. Fill here, there we go. So the next thing that we're going to look at, and the last thing in this particular tutorial, is using images within text areas. So we've got this rectangle here that's got a lot of text in it, and we could do this in two ways. First of all, I'm going to drag an image off the desktop and place it into the page. I'm going to resize it. Now once it's resized, I'm going to edit and copy or cut, or if you want to use the shortcut commands, Command X to cut, and then I'm going to double click into my text block here, and I'm going to choose where I want the image to start. So in this particular case, I'm choosing right at the beginning of the text area, and then I'm going to paste it in. Now as you can see, it's been pasted in the area here, but it's not how I want it to look at the moment, and that's where the wrap panel comes in. So if I select the image, my wrap panel becomes active, and currently you can see that the position is set to be in line with the text. Now that's useful. If I bring this down, if I cut that out of there, and let's say put this image here, what's useful with that is that the image will move down with my content. Or if I choose then, if I select that image again and I choose the wrapping option to be left aligned, let me just cut that out of there and put it back at the beginning here. Let's take that carriage return out. So I'm going to choose my wrap options here now, and I'm going to choose it to be left aligned. Now my text will flow around the image, and I can now set the offsets that I want the image to create spacing around the text. So on this wrap panel here, you can see that I can dial up a new space between the image, and I'm also going to drop it down a bit to be in line with the text there. So I'm just going to create a space above it to put it in line with the text. Let's say that's 2. And we can see now that we've got a nicely spaced image. Let's make it more obvious. Let's put that to 30, and we'll put below it to 30 as well. Or let's put 30 all around. So we can see now that this image is really standing out, and it will also retain its position when you resize the text. So if you've got a text box here, you can, and it will keep its flow position there. So let's switch it to a right position, and that all works great. Now the other thing that you could do, so let's say for instance you've got a scenario, you've got your text content there, you're waiting for a choice of image, but you want to get the layout. Well, the great thing you can do now is you can just create a rectangle for the dimensions that you expect the image to be. If you wanted to put some a background color on it, just so that it's, you know that is an image. Let's just change this to be dark grey, just so that it looks a bit like a kind of a holding image. And we're going to do exactly the same as we did with the image. I'm going to cut it out I'm going to put it into my text here, and now I'm going to use my wrapping tool, set it to left aligned, and I'm going to click on the link button and set that to be 30. And there we've got our image, much like we did before. Now when I get the image from the client, I can click on it, choose the fill, go to select the image. I'm going to set it to be centered and scale to fit. And that, now if I take off the border as well, because I don't want that. Let's also take off the fill color to transparent. And we now have our image in place. It's very useful because it's in a rectangle now. If we wanted to swap that image out for something else, we could just go to the background fill and change it out. We can also still scale the image, and all of our spacing will retain its dimensions. So let's bring this back down, and because it's set to, the fill is set to scale to fit, the image will always scale down with it. So that's very useful. Let's see what happens when we actually publish it. So if we click on preview page in browser, and if we click on inspect element, we can see now that this is a span, this image, and it's got all its settings. But notice in the CSS here, this image is now set and has been rewritten by Muse, so it's given it its own name, and has been used as a transparent, as a background image in the CSS. So if I open that link in a new tab, you'll see that it's actually resized the image as well to match the scale. So each image that you do that with, it will export that image out as an image to its dimensions. So that's, if we just want to cover what we've looked at placing images on the pages, the different things you can do with images, the different types of images you can either pull them onto the page, transparent PNGs, JPEGs, GIFs. You can use PSD files and bring in layers or composites and clip to the actual layer itself. We've seen how to resize images, what happens when we change the images with different transparency or radius or border effects. We've also put images as background fills in rectangles, and we've also used images within text so that the text flows around the image, and use rectangles with background images to allow the text to reflow that. So if we just need a placeholder for the current time, then we can always replace those images out at a later date. Now, one last thing that I wanted to show you as well, and it's probably underused by everybody, including myself. If we place an image on the page here, and we right click again on that image, we get edit image properties. Now from an SEO point of view, this is very important. So we've got our alt text options here, and we can do that on every single image. So they're really useful there, and something that I think web designers in general don't do enough of. We don't put alt tags on all our images when we should do, but that's how you do it. So hopefully that's given you a really good detailed view of how to use images correctly, how to put them within text flow, how to wrap, how to use PSDs, and we hope that you found this tutorial useful, and we look forward to seeing what you build. Remember to take a look at musegrid.com. We release a new template every Monday. We have new widgets going on all the time, or follow us on Facebook, and we look forward to speaking with you soon. Thanks for watching.